and said, "Whatever you want, Esther, you've got it." And she asked for another day of fighting there in Susa. And so today I want to pick up in chapter 9. I want to reiterate a verse in chapter 9 early on, verse 4, and then we're going to go a little lower, okay? Verse 4 says, "For Mordecai had become a powerful person in the king's palace, and his fame had spread through all the provinces. Mordecai continued to grow increasingly powerful." What is this telling us? It is telling us that this event in the life of the Jewish people, in the life of Mordecai and Queen Esther, this is not Mordecai's pivotal event. In other words, even after this event, he continues to get more and more and more powerful, okay? It's not that he has this event in his life, he becomes powerful, and when it's over, he begins to diminish. That's not what this says. This says that this is the beginning of his power, that he begins to increase in power more and more. And we'll see that in terms of how the book even ends in a little while. So I wanted to point that out. But let's go, let's see here, to verse, I want to go back to verse 16, okay? The other Jews, those in the royal provinces, had assembled, defended their lives, and won rest from their enemies, killing 75,000 of those who hated them, but without touching the spoil. Okay, we read that last time. Let's continue. On the 13th day of the month of Adar, and that happened on the 13th day. So on the 14th day of Adar, they rested and made it a holiday of celebrating and rejoicing. Of course they did. Of course they did. However, the Jews in Shushan and Susa assembled on both the 13th and 14th days of Adar. So it was on the 15th that they rested and made a holiday for celebrating and rejoicing. This is why the Jews of the villages, those who live in unwalled towns, make the 14th day of the month of Adar a day of celebrating and rejoicing, a holiday and a time for sending each other portions of food. Okay, so those in larger cities or walled cities would celebrate on the 15th. Unwalled cities would celebrate on the 14th. Now, this is really important, and we're going to see it come to fruition even more in just a minute. But this is a celebration of resurrection, of life, right? Of rest from one's enemies. It's as if in a small way they have entered the life of the kingdom. They had won their lives by the grace of God, right? They had beaten their enemies, killed thousands of them. None of them were killed according to Jewish tradition. This was a time of celebration and rejoicing. And that word rejoicing and celebration reminds us of Sukkot. Reminds us of Sukkot. Remember, it is right before Sukkot that we have the resurrection of the dead, right? On Yom Teruah, or the Feast of Trumpets, or Rosh Hashanah, right? The awakening blast. We have the time of judgment. Yes, we are judged, but our enemies are also judged on the Day of Atonement. So he judges our enemies, right? And then we have a time of celebration. Well, they have been through the long summer, so to speak, of preparing, of praying, of crying out to the Lord, of fasting, of making sure that their lives were right before Adonai, so that when the time to fight came, they were ready. The letters went out, they were preparing, the time had come, there had been time of prayer and fasting, of crying out to the Lord, the time came, and now they have won by the hand of Almighty God. And so now they are rejoicing and celebrating. It is as if they had risen from the dead. Okay? This is very much a celebration of a type of resurrection. And that's going to become important to us in just a minute. All right, let's go to verse 20. Mordecai recorded these events and sent letters to all the Jews in all the provinces of King Xerxes, both near and far, instructing them to observe the 14th day of the month of Adar and the 15th day every year, to commemorate the days on which the Jews obtained rest. They attained rest. Remember, Sukkot is the celebration of the wedding feast. It is the going into the kingdom and the celebration of the kingdom. It is the time of rest of the kingdom. Remember, Hebrews talks about there is yet a Sabbath rest still there, waiting for us. So it is a celebration of that rest. And here we see that hint again back to Sukkot, back to that idea of resurrection and winning over one's enemies and celebration and rejoicing. It's an echo back to that. So one thing, I've just noticed something. I'm going to turn on a light here because I feel like I'm in the dark. Does that help? That helps. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I was in the dark, wasn't I? Sorry about that. So they have this time of rejoicing, this time of rest. And Mordecai sends out these letters to the Jewish people, both far and near, instructing them to observe these 2 days, right? And how does he instruct them to observe them? Okay. By celebrating a holiday, right? What's he say? For them, this was a time that their sorrow turned to gladness and their mourning turned into a holiday. Okay? Then he says, they will make them days of celebrating and rejoicing, sending portions of food to each other and giving gifts to the poor. The poor, Yeshua said, would be with us, right? So to take care of those who maybe can't afford to celebrate themselves, we're to help them celebrate this. It is a time of gathering and rejoicing, remembering that he took his people from mourning, from lamenting, from sorrow, right, to gladness, right, to honor. We talked about that, from things being heavy to now they're light. Now they're in the light. Now they are rejoicing. This, again, I cannot emphasize enough, is an echo back to the fall feasts of trumpets or Rosh Hashanah, of Yom Kippur, and Sukkot, all wrapped up together. Okay? And Mordecai has sent out instructions for the Jews to do this. So the Jews, this is verse 23, took it up upon themselves. I'm sorry, I'm going to start that sentence over. So the Jews took it upon themselves to continue what they had already begun to do. They had already started this. That very day, right after they won their victory, they began to celebrate. They began to share with one another. Okay, they'd already started to do that. So when they get this letter from Mordecai, It's not like he's telling them to do something that's foreign to them. It's not like he's telling them to do something they hadn't already thought of. He's basically saying, keep going, keep doing it. Let's do this every year, right? And so they'd already begun to do it, and as Mordecai had written to them, because Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them, and had thrown pur, that is, cast lots, to crush and destroy them. But when Esther came before the king, he ordered by letters that Haman's wicked scheme, which he had plotted against the Jews, should recoil on his own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows. This is why these days have been called Purim, after the word pur. Thus, because of everything written in this letter that Mordecai had sent out, and what they had seen concerning this matter, they had experienced it themselves, and what had come upon them, the Jews resolved and took upon themselves, their descendants, and all who might join them, that without fail they would observe these 2 days in accordance with what was written in the letter, and at the appointed time every year, and that these days would be remembered and observed throughout every generation, every family, every province, and every city, and that these days of Purim would never cease among the Jews, or their memory be lost by their descendants. There's a lot in there, so we're going to unpack it, okay? He writes this letter to the Jews. The book tells us why he's writing the letter, recapping the story for us, that Haman came against the Jews to destroy them, to annihilate them, to crush them, and that he threw the pur, that is the lots, to determine the day. That's where we get the name Purim. Now, I want to do a word study for a minute on the word pur, because pur is not the Hebrew word for lots, it's the Persian word for lots, okay? Pull this up. The word pur actually means a lot as by means of a broken piece. So something that's broken, okay? That's very important for us, okay? This is a noun. And nouns in Hebrew come from a verb, right? The roots of words in Hebrew are verbs. So this noun of pur came from a verb, also pur, right? And pur is, the verb is the actual primitive root of the word, and it means to break, to bring to naught, or to utterly take, and to crush. It means to crush. Remember, Haman came to crush and destroy them, to break them, to bring them to naught, to utterly take everything away from them. That is what he set out to do, okay? So this idea that Haman threw the pur, something that's broken, as lots, to determine the time in which he would crush, destroy, break, bring the Jewish people to naught, and utterly take everything from them. This word contains it all, okay? The first time this word, the verb form of it, is used is Psalms 33:10, and it says this: "The Lord brings the counsel of the nations to nothing," to naught. That's our word. "He makes the plans of the peoples of no effect." That's very interesting that this word would actually be used in the Psalms to talk about the plans of the nations coming to naught. It makes you wonder if Psalm 33 was actually written around the time of Purim. Okay. The next time it is, well, another time it is used is Ezekiel chapter 17. We know Ezekiel was in exile in Babylon, right? And it says this: "Therefore, thus says the Lord God, as I live, surely my oath, which he despised, and my covenant, which he broke, I will recompense on his head." So this is talking about a breaking of a covenant, which is very interesting, because with Persian history, we know that Cyrus, in effect, made a covenant with the Jewish people that they could go home. We know that Xerxes' father, so that was Xerxes' grandfather, Cyrus. We know that his father actually made provision and saw to it that the temple in Jerusalem was rebuilt under his reign. So his grandfather and his father had, in essence, a type of covenant with the Jewish people. And then comes Xerxes, and he puts Haman in charge, and Haman wants to break that covenant, or crush that covenant of life with the Jewish people, and turn it into a covenant of death. He wants them to be destroyed, to be broken, to be crushed, to come to naught, right? To have everything taken from them. He's, in essence, breaking the covenant that Cyrus and Darius had made with the Jewish people, that God had made with the Jewish people through Cyrus and Darius. If you remember, Isaiah even calls Cyrus, long before Cyrus is even born, a type of Messiah, an anointed one, a type of Messiah for the Jewish people. So they have this covenant of life to go home and live and rest, enter, in essence, go back, enter the kingdom once again, right? And Xerxes, through Haman, breaks that covenant. It is through his wife, a Jewess, revealing herself as a Jew, presenting her adopted father, her relative Mordecai, Mordecai becoming the prime minister of this kingdom, that Xerxes' eyes are opened, so to speak, and he realizes he has broken the covenant of life that his grandfather and father had made with the Jewish people. He has, in essence, broken that covenant and made a covenant of death. That is why it is important for us to realize that Purim is a time of resurrection. It is a rebirth, a resurrection of the covenant of life. In our sin, we make a covenant with death. The Jewish people, before the exile, in their sin, made a covenant with death. Okay? They were even saying death won't harm us, Sheol won't harm us, right? All this stuff, we've made a covenant with death, we're safe. This isn't what Isaiah is prophesying, is not going to come about. these types of things. But this covenant of death in our sin, we've been turned over to death. You cannot negotiate with death like the Israelites thought they could. You cannot negotiate with the enemy. Death comes for us all. It is appointed unto man once to die, and after this the judgment, correct? You cannot make a covenant with death. This is, you're not going to harm me, okay? The only way out of death is to enter into covenant with Messiah, with God. I've kind of mentioned this before, but I am beginning to believe more and more and more that the resurrection of Lazarus took place probably on the 15th day of Adar, or on Purim. Because if you remember, he lingers for 4 more days, right? So they have the 3 days of fasting. Then there's the 14th day. And then he goes back toward Jerusalem, a walled city. And he's in the village of Bethany, outside of Jerusalem, more than likely at a time of celebration for Purim. And he goes up to the tomb of Lazarus and calls forth Lazarus from the dead. But do you remember when he first gets there, Martha meets him, and if you had been here, my brother would not have died, right? And Yeshua says something to her that he will rise again, right? And that's in verse 23 of John 11. And Martha said, I know that he will rise again at the resurrection on the last day. They knew of the resurrection on the last day. Daniel, in Daniel chapter 12, talks about the resurrection, right? The resurrection was not a foreign concept to the Jewish people. So she knew her brother would raise on the last day. But Yeshua is making a point here. And Yeshua in the book of John, whenever he's around Jerusalem, whenever he's in Jerusalem, when he's at a feast, he makes points about himself based upon the feast. Doesn't he? At the water pouring ceremony at Sukkot, he says, I'm the living water. Right? Well, here he's making a point about himself again to Martha and those who have witnessed Lazarus' death. He says to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever puts his trust in me will live even if he dies. And everyone living and trusting in me will never die. Do you believe this? Now, obviously, he's not saying we'll never die in a physical way, because obviously we just quoted the verse that says what? It's appointed unto man once to die, and after this the judgment. The only people who will not die in that sense are those who are still alive when he returns and are caught up with him in the air, whether that's us or another generation, right? But those who are caught up together with him in the air and are taken to him with him to Jerusalem. Okay? But he's saying here, I am the resurrection. I'm life. I'm the one who breaks the covenant of death that sin has a hold over you. I'm the one who does that, Martha. I'm the one who brought the people back to life. I'm the one who rescued my people at Purim. I'm the one who reminded Xerxes that he has an obligation to the Jewish people, to my people. I'm the one who did that. I am the resurrection and the life. Believe in me, right? It's real interesting because when Isaiah talks about Israel's covenant with death, that, the covenant they made, that, they're not going to be sent into exile, or if they are sent into exile, it's not going to last very long, just maybe a couple of years, and then they'll come back, everything will come back, but that this type of judgment was not going to touch them. Okay? Isaiah 28:15 talks about that covenant of death, and then in verse 16, Adonai says, "Look, I am laying in Zion a tested stone, a costly cornerstone, a firm foundation stone. He who trusts will not rush here and there." You're not going to run after the lies of this isn't going to harm you, or what God said really isn't going to happen. You're not going to run after the lies. You're going to run after the truth. Okay? I will make justice the plumb line and righteousness the plumb bob. Hail will sweep away the refuge of lies. Water will overflow the hiding place. Your covenant with death will be annulled, and your contract with Sheol will not stand. In other words, what I said would come to pass would come to pass. But in essence, we have a covenant with death because there is that promise of death because of sin. And only in Messiah, that true cornerstone, that firm foundation, can that covenant with death be broken and resurrection occur. Life be given. Okay? What we see in Purim is that covenant of life that Haman and Xerxes broke being put back in place by Mordecai and Esther and Xerxes. And God upholding that covenant of life and in essence resurrecting his people, judging their enemies, and giving them rest and a time of celebration and rejoicing, gladness and honor. Again, we see the hints back to Feast of Trumpets or Rosh Hashanah, Yom Teruah, Day of Atonement, and the Feast of Tabernacles or Sukkot. Okay? That time of resurrection. That's why I believe that more than likely Lazarus was raised at the time of Purim. Yeshua is once again around Jerusalem. And every time he goes to Jerusalem, is in that vicinity, in the book of John, he's there for a feast. Purim is not mentioned by name, but that idea of resurrection. Shavuot in the book of John is not mentioned by name, but when you look at John chapter 5, if you know the themes of Shavuot, that's John chapter 5 when he talks about another feast, right? So it would not surprise me at all if the resurrection of Lazarus takes place at Purim, because Purim is about resurrection. But notice something else. Not only is it about resurrection, and not only do they obligate themselves and their physical descendants to the celebration of Purim, but they obligate another group of people. We find it in verse 27. All who might join them, that without fail they would observe these 2 days in accordance with the letter, with what was in the letter. So they obligate themselves, they obligate their descendants, and they obligate all who might join them. That's very interesting. Which means that Yeshua is obligated to celebrate Purim as well. They're obligating themselves and their descendants to remember. They're obligating those who would join them to remember. Have we not joined them? Have we not been grafted into the tree of Israel, that cultivated olive tree? Have we not become part of the Commonwealth of Israel? And in that generation, had they not had people who became Jews along with them, who had joined them? Of course they did. Chapter 8 tells us they did. And so all of those people are being obligated to the celebration and remembrance of what God did for his people in raising them from shame to honor, and raising them from sorrow to rejoicing, from mourning to life. That means that we are obligated to celebrate Purim. And I know that there are those within the Messianic movement and Hebrew Roots movement. I'm not going to get into that discussion in terms of the difference today. But there are those within those movements who think they don't have any obligation to Purim because it's not part of the 7 in Leviticus 23. It is very important for us to realize that when the people of God obligate them and their descendants and those who join them to something, that is binding. Right? Yeshua talks about the principle of binding and loosing, and that in of itself is a whole other study. But that is what they are doing here. They are binding the people to this obligation. And therefore it is binding on us because it was binding on him. And it is our job to follow in the footprints, in the footsteps of our Messiah, of Yeshua the Messiah, the King of the Jews. He is our King. And we have joined them. And so we are obligated, because we were obligated here when Mordecai sent out the letter. Okay? I hope that makes sense. And I hope that if you didn't celebrate Purim this year because you didn't think you were obligated to, that now you realize you are obligated to celebrate Purim, and that next year you will celebrate it with such fervor and rejoicing that you will ask yourself, why did I ever imagine I didn't need to do this? Because if we can't celebrate God resurrecting his people, in essence, saving his people, his entire people, what can we celebrate? And isn't that what he did with Egypt? Isn't that what he's going to do in our future? In the time of tribulation? Is that not what he's going to do when he returns? He's going to raise us up. He's going to resurrect us. He's going to bring us life. He's going to bring us into the kingdom. Is this at Purim not a small glimpse of that? Yes, it is. And so worthy of remembering. God causes people over and over to remember what he has done for them. We are to remember what he's done for our people because we have joined with them. Their ancestors have become our ancestors. We all have become heirs to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob through faith in Yeshua. Through the blood of the Messiah, we have been brought near. So let's continue. Verse 29. Then Esther the queen, the daughter of Abihail, and Mordecai the Jew, gave full written authority to confirm a second letter about Purim. Okay, so Mordecai wrote the first one. Now Esther and Mordecai are writing a second one. He sent copies of it to all the Jews, to the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Xerxes, that included Israel, ensuring their peace and security, their shalom, and their security, they're safe. And requiring the observance of these days of Purim at their designated times. So the fast before, and then you have the 14th and 15th of Adar. As Mordecai the Jew and Esther the queen had enjoined them or obligated them or bound them to. And as they had established for themselves and their descendants concerning the matters of fasting and lamenting. Right? And of course we know that their descendants also includes those who join themselves to God's people. Okay? Would be us. So obligating them and their descendants, those who join, to the matters of fasting and lamenting. Understanding that rejoicing, understanding that resurrection, understanding that honor came out of a time of prayer and fasting and lamenting and crying out to God is so important. We are not to the time of resurrection yet. And there will be a time of lamenting and fasting and prayer and crying out to God for him to deliver us once again. We are in that time, are we not? We are in that time in terms of that is basically our time of preparation. That is a time of our sanctification, that time of preparing for our time in the kingdom. What does Yeshua tell us? Take your cross. Take up your cross daily. We're to die daily. He tells us to pick. This is the time of sorrow. This is the time of trial. This is the time where I am preparing you for the kingdom. Before the rejoicing, before the resurrection, comes the time of fasting and prayer and lamenting. What did Yeshua say about when he was asked about why his disciples did not fast? Do you remember? Why would they fast with the bridegroom with them? But a time will come when basically the bridegroom's not with them, that they will fast, right? The bridegroom is not physically with us right now. He is at the right hand of the Father. We have the Holy Spirit. These are the days of fasting. These are the days of preparation, right? We are still in the time when the enemy still wants to crush and destroy. He hasn't been put in the pit yet. Yeshua hasn't been put on the throne yet. Not the throne of David. Not in Jerusalem. So we are still waiting. And so these times of lamenting, these times of fasting, these times of crying out to the Lord come before the time of resurrection, the time of rejoicing, the time of honor. Okay, it is a pattern. Okay, and so remember the times of lamenting. Remember the times of fasting, so that you can truly be able to remember and appreciate the times of celebration and rejoicing and honor. Right? Verse 32. At Esther's order, at Esther's order, these matters of Purim were confirmed and put in writing in the book. I believe the book it's talking about here is the book of Esther. So it is under